Welcome to Brother Miller's Notes. I'm so glad you're with me today as we look at sections 102 to 105. Thanks for being with me. What would you do if you were asked to drop everything from your busy schedule and travel over 800 miles to assist some fellow saints and things are going bad for them? They really need some help. Would you go? Now my guess is most everybody, all of you would go. I'd go. But now what would happen if you got there and people look at you and go, we don't need you. And you dropped everything, gone that far, and when you get there, you don't need to do anything. How'd you feel? What would you be thinking? Well, that really is the theme of what we're going to talk about today. It's Zion's Camp, where saints are asked to drop everything to help redeem Zion, and when they get there, the Lord gives a revelation. Section 105 says, I don't need you anymore here. But there's reasons why. We're going to look at those reasons why and apply them to our life. But as an introduction, just want to start off by talking about councils. Church councils help us seek the Lord's will in unity and faith. Councils function at all levels of the church, including general, area, stake, ward, quorum, and other leadership councils. The purpose of church councils, is to seek and obtain divine revelation. Church councils are an environment where we can receive inspiration to make decisions, better serve individuals and families, and plan and coordinate the work of the church. Church councils operate differently than they do in other decision-making bodies. They're not governed by majority rule or best practice. The leader does not make decisions on his or her own. When a question or need is brought to the council for consideration, council members are encouraged to speak honestly from their personal experience and from their position as organization leaders. I love the way that's phrased. I know that's from Handbook 2 and that's now obsolete, but I'll have some quotes from the General Handbook here in just a minute. But we are in a church that's full of councils, and we counsel together because we want to try and help others, and really that counseling process has to include the Lord. Well, one of these councils is established, and it's part of section 102. There's a meeting that's occurring at Joseph Smith's home. Now, this is in Kirtland. We see the Kirtland Temple. You go north, there's a cemetery, and north of the cemetery is Joseph Smith's home. And here's some pictures of some of the people who were there. You had Joseph Smith, of course, Sidney Rigdon, Frederick G. Williams, and in section 2, they're going to be acknowledged. These are the leaders. We call them today as a stake presidency, but this time they're also Joseph Smith's going to have kind of a dual role, and Sidney and Frederick. They're presidency of the church, but also president of the stake of that area, because there's one stake. You have Joseph Smith Sr., John Smith, Joseph Cole, John Johnson, Martin Harris, John S. Carter, Jared Carter, Oliver Cowdery, Samuel H. Smith, Orson Hyde, Sylvester Smith, Luke Johnson. They are voted unanimously to be a part of this High Council. High Councils are called by the stake presidency to assist the stake presidency in doing their jobs. Years ago, I served on the High Council, and my stake president, great stake president, went to a training meeting, and there was a question and answer. One of the stake presidents said, I'm getting burned out. How do I stop from getting burned out? What advice do you give me so I'm not burned out as a stake president? Boy, and that general authority was just so quick, just said, you're able to call 12 of the best men in a stake to help you out, to assist you. Use them. They're very capable. The stake presidency calls 12 high priests to form the stake high council. If an elder is called to serve on the high council, he's ordained a high priest before he's set apart. Under the direction of the stake presidency, high counselors help with the work of salvation and exaltation in the stake. And all high counselors serve on the stake council. So section 102 organizes the first high council and outlines the responsibility. And the General Handbook further explains current responsibilities of high councils in section 6.5, if you want to read that. I want to add one little postscript note of the calling of those 12 individuals. This is a picture of Lorenzo Dow Young, and he was called to be a member of the first High Council, but I probably went pretty fast, so you might not have noticed, but his name was not on that list. He explains the lesson of what he learned when he said no to that calling. On that occasion, I committed grave error and desired to leave a record of it for a lesson to others. The prophet requested me to take a seat with the brethren who had been selected for this council. Instead of doing so, I rose and pleaded my inability to fill so responsible a position. manifesting, I think, considerable earnestness in the matter. He then said he really desired that I should take his place. But, as I still excused myself, he appointed another to fill it. I think that was the reason he never again called me to fill any important position in the priesthood. I have long since learned to go where I am called, and not set up my judgment against that of those who are called to guide in this kingdom. Now, while Prophet Joseph Smith's life, he does not get a kind of a priesthood calling of importance. Later on in Utah, he is called to be a bishop, and later on a patriarch. I just want to say my time in the High Council was a great opportunity for me to learn a lot. I think I learned a lot more than anything I taught. But I loved the brethren I served on. I loved the councils with our wonderful sisters, Relief Society, Young Women's state primary president or presidency, depending on where we were talking. It was just a glorious calling. Now, a little bit of background. We have two church centers right now. We have church centered in Kirtland and Independence, Missouri. And in 1833 at the end, now this is kind of one of the last videos, a lot of problems have been happening in Independence with mobs. They're kicking the saints, or have kicked the saints out. And on the 22nd of February, 1834, Parley P. Pratt and Lyman Wright arrive in Kirtland from Independence, Missouri, and they're saying, hey, Joseph, here's what happened. July 20th, 1833, a bunch of these old-time settlers got together and they make a secret constitution. Its purpose is to kick us out. The mob went to W.W. Phelps's place of business, printing office, and printing press. They destroy it. They scatter the type. They destroy the Book of Commandments, which is being printed. They level the second story. That's the printing office. Bishop Partridge and Charles Allen, they're trying to keep the peace. They're trying to make people understand. And the mob tars and feathers them. The mob has burned crops. They've destroyed homes, barns, businesses. There have been a lot of threats. Whip every man, woman, child, unless they leave the county. The church petitions to Governor Dunklin, and at first he's receptive, and he promises support part with like the National Guard military to be able to come and help the saints kind of make things right. They also direct a petition to Samuel Lucas. He's a county judge. They hire some very competent attorneys that will represent the church very well. Alexander Donovan and David Atkinson. Well, on October 31st, 1833, the Whitmer settlement is attacked. And yes, the end of October. It's getting a little cold. So their solution to help the saints move along is take the roof off the home. Now the weather's going to come in. You don't have time to repair it. And they go in and they just start whipping people. They nearly whip several men to death, including Hiram Page. Now, the 4th of November, the mob violence continues. They capture the Mormon ferry. Philo Dibble is shot in the stomach. You may remember he receives a blessing. He vomits up about a quart of blood, and part of the clothing was blown in with a musket ball and the ball. And he just describes how he felt a little bit weak, but he was healed very, very quickly. Andrew Barber is killed. Lieutenant Governor Boggs is not a hero here. He confronts 200 of the saints, and he just says, you got to give us the weapons, and the saints surrender their weapons to him, but he is a part of the secret constitution, and he wants them out. He has a hatred, it seems, for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he forces them, the members, to cross the Missouri River in November when it's cold. Parley P. Pratt wrote of this, hundreds of people were seen in every direction, some in tents, some in open air, around the fires, while rain descended in torrents. Husbands were inquiring for their wives, wives for their husbands, parents for children, children for parents. The scene was indescribable, and I'm sure would have melted the hearts of any people on the earth except for our blind oppressors and a blind and ignorant community. Well, on the 24th of February, the High Council's meeting at Joseph Smith's home. That's 2 days after Parley P. Pratt and Lyman Wright have arrived in Kirtland from Independence, Missouri, and they're counseling together about this problem. The Lord gives in section 103 2 reasons why Zion was scattered. Here's why it happened. One, and this is not very fulfilling in a lot of ways, that they, the mob, the wicked, might fill up the measure of their iniquities, that their cup might be full. The Lord allows people's agency to be honored even when they do bad things. You see that in the Book of Mormon, where they're doing evil acts or Doctrine and Covenants, Old Testament, New Testament. The Lord allows bad things to happen, and he says, okay, this is on them, and they're going to be accountable for their actions. And the Lord also says, you as saints weren't blameless either, and that those who call themselves after my name might be chastened for a little season, because they did not hearken altogether unto the precepts and commandments which I gave unto them. And then he kind of starts giving some promises. Just a reminder from section 58, after much tribulation comes the blessings. You're going to get the blessings, but I want you to be jewels in section 101. He says, I got to make sure you're refined. And in section 103, verse 15, he says, and behold, I say unto you, the redemption of Zion must needs come by power. And I think in the moment of time, and you're reading this, there's a way where I see that they could go, oh, power, this has got to be military force. This has got to be might. The might is going to make right. I don't think that's the way the Lord intends it. The Lord intends that they go on Zion's camp to learn lessons, but he wants them to know this is the type of power comes by obedience and unity and righteousness. And the comparison is like when Moses led the children of Israel out of their bondage, God was there to fight their battles and invited them to sanctify themselves. So that there you get verse 16. Therefore I'll raise up to my people a man, this is Joseph Smith, who shall lead them, these are the saints, as Moses led the children of Israel. For ye are the children of Israel and the seed of Abraham, and ye must be led out of bondage, once again, by that same type of power like Moses did. And with a stretched out arm, that's symbolic. I'm in charge, I've got this. As your fathers, now Moses and these people were led at the first, even so shall the redemption of Zion be. And we look back at this with our vision, it's kind of, oh, that's pretty clear. But that's not the way I think they really saw it. You go back to section 101, verse 55, where the Lord of the vineyard has a vineyard, and there's a tower. And he says, hey, what I want you to do is take the strength of my house, young men and aged, and we're going to go on this way, and we're going to redeem Zion. And then in section 103, the Lord says, verily I say unto you that my servant Joseph Smith, Jr., is the man whom I liken the servant who the Lord of the vineyard spake in the parable which I had given you. Therefore, let my servant Joseph Smith say unto the strength of my house, my young men, and the middle-aged, gather yourselves together unto the land of Zion, upon the land which I have bought with money, and has been consecrated unto me. Let the churches send up their wise men with monies, and purchase lands, even as I have commanded them. And then, then you got this one where people are like going, okay, I'm going to go, and, well, is there going to be fighting? You get verse 27, let no man be afraid to lay down his life for my sake, and for whosoever layeth down his life for my sake shall find it again. And whosoever not willing laying down my life for his sake is not my disciple. I don't think that's the way the Lord intended it, because you put it in context with what before. He says, I'm going to deliver you with power, just like I instructed Moses to deliver out of the bondage of Egypt, and he did with my power, my stretched out arm. I love the reminder from President James E. Faust. For most of us, what is required is not to die for the church, but to live for it. For many, living a Christ-like life in every day may even be more difficult than laying down one's life. Well, the Lord specifies several people to be in charge of Zion's camp. Of course, you got Joseph Smith and Parley P. Pratt and Lyman Wright and Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith and Frederick G. Williams, Orson Hyde, and Orson Pratt. Gotta love the beard, even though I'm probably in the way of that one. And he says, is not my servant, verse 30, it is my will that my servant Parley P. Pratt and my servant Lyman Wright should not return to the land of their brethren until they have obtained companies to go up into the land of Zion by tens and by 20s or by 50s or by 100, till they obtain the number of 500 of the strength of my house. But this is my will. Ask, and ye shall receive. But men do not always do my will. Therefore, if you cannot obtain 500, seek if you can get 300. 33. If you can't get 300, maybe 100. And then verse 34, but verily I say unto you, a commandment I give unto you, you shall not go up in the land of Zion until you have obtained 100 by the strength of my house, to go up with you into the land of Zion. So there's a call. We need volunteers to depart from Kirtland on May 1st, and we're going to go to Zion's camp. It's going to be a distance of about 900 miles. 8 to 900 miles, depending on how you're traveling, right? Some are going to make the journey without shoes, like Martin Harris, or without socks, like Lyman Wright. Most records agree that there were about 204 men, 11 women, and 7 children. Didn't travel on Sunday. They woke up bright and early at dark 30, 4 o'clock a.m. And this is a list of the members of the Zion's camp. I'm going to come back to this list at the end of this video. But you can see there's quite a few, and if you want to pause, look, see if you know somebody on this, that's great. But there is Joseph Young, number 203, you have some of the sisters and children. The youngest was 16, George A. Smith. Oldest was 79, Samuel Baker. Only 2 of the 204 men desert. They travel an average of 25 to 40 miles a day. It begins on May 1st and disbands on the 24th of June. It takes about 45 days to cross 4 states. And Joseph Smith says of this experience, "We know the angels were our companions, for we saw them." When they get to around the Independence, Missouri area, they've had that promise from Governor Dunklin that he would support the saints in getting their homes, their property back. He ultimately withdraws his support that involves any state military force. And after he withdraws that support, Joseph receives Section 105 and disbands Zion's camp. So they went there was a need, and then afterwards, you're not needed. Make your way back. And so here's the way that I would consider doing this in my classroom or maybe in my home. There's a lot of stories and lessons you can learn from Zion's camp. And a lot of these lessons can be internalized better when I think students or family members can read them for themselves. So I will there's probably like 18 to 20 of these, and this is my first one, but I'll just kind of print something off, or just the quote, maybe not the pictures in the background, but here's the quote, and I'll have numbers and just put them all around the classroom or all around a front room and just say, walk and read and just look at, okay, here's Zion's camp. They're having trials and difficulties. Which one may apply to you? Which one stands out to you? Which one would maybe help you in your Zion's camp journey today? And try and have them make that comparison. Probably give them 15, 20 minutes just to circulate and read all these and then come together at the very end and have a discussion. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read you some of the quotes and tell you about some of the stories. And then at the very end, just kind of say, hey, here's the discussion I'd have. And so if the teaching method's great. If not, just enjoy some of the stories. Kirtland was a pretty good place for volunteers. Some of the other outlying places, not so much, but Kirtland was pretty good. There were some reservations. They were worried about, hey, you're going to go have this armed conflict, and I don't want to go be a soldier. Joseph's office is promising people that if they'll do what God wants them to do, listen to what the words of the prophet, him, God will protect them. So as he goes to Brigham Young steps forward right away, and then Brigham wants to get his older brother Joseph to go, and he has some reservations. Now I'm going to the quote. Brother Brigham and Brother Joseph Smith says to him, "If you'll go with me into the camp of Missouri and keep my counsel, I promise you in the name of the Almighty that I'll lead you there and back again. Not a hair of your head shall be harmed." Hearing this, Joseph Young agreed to participate, and the 3 men clasped hands in confirmation of the promise. When they're on their way, Joseph Smith takes Oliver Cowdery and Zebri Coltrane aside and essentially says, "The Lord wants me to show you a vision. Let me show it to you." He said, "Let's take a walk." They went to a place where there's some beautiful grass and grapevines and swamp beach interlaced. President Joseph Smith then said, "Let us pray." All 3 prayed in turn, Joseph, Oliver, Zebedee. Brother Joseph then said, "Now, brethren, we'll see some visions." Joseph lay down on the ground with his back and stretched out his arm, and the 2 brethren lay on them. The heavens gradually opened, and they saw a golden throne on a circular foundation, something like a lighthouse. And on the throne were 2 aged personages, having white hair and clothed in white garments. They were the 2 most beautiful and perfect specimens of mankind he ever saw. Joseph said, "They are our first parents, Adam and Eve. Adam was a large, broad-shouldered man, and Eve was as a woman, was as large in proportion." I don't know if you've ever come across a rattlesnake. Sometimes, they're rattling. It's pretty frightening, and you stay away. Well, some of the brethren have found one, and they're playing with it, tormenting the little rattlesnake. And when Joseph comes on this, now I'm going to the quote, he says, "Let these rattlesnakes alone. Don't hurt them. How will the serpent ever lose his venom, while the servants of God possess the same disposition and continue to make war upon it? Men must become harmless before the brute creation, and when men lose their vicious dispositions and cease to destroy the animal race, the lion and the lamb can dwell together, and the suckling child can play with the serpent in safety. The brethren took the serpents carefully on sticks and carried them across the creek. I exhorted the brethren not to kill a serpent, bird, or an animal of any kind during our journey unless it became necessary in order to preserve ourselves from hunger. And he said, I frequently often on the subject, when a certain occasion came up to the brethren who were watching a squirrel on a tree, and to prove to them, to know if they would heed my counsel, I took one of their guns, and shot the squirrel and passed on, leaving the squirrel on the ground. Brother Orson Hyde, who was just behind, picked up the squirrel and said, We will cook this, that nothing may be lost. I perceived that the brethren understood what I did it for, and in their practice gave more heed to my precept than to my example, which was right. I just love that story, and I can just picture him shooting the pesky squirrel to prove a point to help these brethren. Okay, number 4. While in the camp of Zion on the way to Missouri in 1834, Joseph was some ways ahead of the company one day, and there was seen talking with him by the roadside a man, a stranger. When the company came up, there was no person with him. When at camp that night, Heber asked the prophet who that was. Joseph replied it was the beloved disciple John, who was then on his way to the 10 tribes in the north. That's just so cool. John the Beloved's there just checking in. That's kind of awesome. Okay, number 5. Joseph gives counsel that, hey, these are really snake eggs, don't eat them. And let's see if people really do or not. Some of the brethren went on to the sandbar, and they got a quantity of turtles' eggs, as they supposed. I told them they were snake eggs. They must not eat them. But some of them thought they knew more about it than I did, and still persisted they were turtle eggs. I said they were snake eggs. Eat snake eggs, will you? The man that eats them will be sorry for it. You'll be sick. Notwithstanding all I said, several brethren ate them, and were sick all day after it. There were some complainers in the camp. Some were much higher level complainers. Lester Smith was one of them. And the prophet was continually trying to teach and help them and train them and correct them, even as they're complaining. So during Zion's camp, the prophet was reassuring, correcting, and pacifying many of the men. On Saturday, 17th of May, the prophet warned that they would meet with misfortunes, difficulties, and hindrances as the certain result of giving way to such a rebellious, contentious spirit, and said, You will know it before you leave this place. He exhorted them to humble themselves before the Lord and become united, that they might not be scourged. When the camp awakened the next morning, they discovered that almost every horse in the camp was foundered, a debilitating condition that was caused by overfeeding. The condition hindered movement of the animal, but movement was essential for the animal's survival. When the prophet realized the condition of their horses, he said to the men, quote, that for a witness that God overruled them and had his eye upon them, all those who would humble themselves before the Lord should know the hands of the Lord was in this misfortune, and the horses should be restored to health immediately. Most of the men complied, and by noon of the same day the horses were as nimble as ever. One man who had a rebellious spirit and would not be humbled found his horse dead soon afterward. There's also where people are getting sick. They call it milk sickness, coming from milk. And Joseph just says, gives this advice, and some heed it and some don't. Okay, at dinner time, some of the brethren expressed considerable fear on the account of milk sicknesses, which people were troubled along the route. Many were afraid to use milk or butter, and appealed to me to know if it was not dangerous. I told them to use all they could get, unless they were told it was sick. Some expressed fear as they might be sold to us by our enemies for the purpose of doing us injury. I told them not to fear, that if they would follow my counsel and use all they could get from friend or enemy, it should do them good, and none be sick in consequence of it. With this promise and others he gave in the camp, the prophet warned men not to trifle with the principle or tempt the Lord. The prophet recorded, quote, Although we passed through the neighborhoods where many of the people and cattle were infected with the sickness, yet my words were fulfilled. Well, back to complaining. There are some people who complained a lot. And as George Albert Smith recorded, quote, During the entire trip, he, Joseph, never uttered a murmur or complaint, while most of the men in the camp complained to him of their sore toes, blistered feet, long drives, scanty supply of provisions, poor quality of bread, bad corn dodger, frowsy butter, strong honey, maggoty bacon and cheese, and so forth. Even a dog could not bark at some men without their murmuring at Joseph. If they had to camp with bad water, it would nearly cause rebellion. Yet we are the camp of Zion, and many of us were prayerless, thoughtless, careless, heedless, foolish, or devilish, and yet we did not know it. Joseph had to bear with us and tutor us like children. There were many, however, in the camp who never murmured and were always ready and willing to do as our leaders desired. That's just a great quote. They saw the hand of the Lord in their journey. They saw the hand of the Lord protecting them. So this is number 9. One of the best examples of divine intervention came mid-June on the banks of the Big and Little fishing rivers. The camp had been under constant threat from attack from Missourians who had assembled to destroy the Mormon marchers. On the morning of Thursday, June 19, an agitated black woman warned Luke Johnson that a large company was planning to destroy the Mormon camp. A farmer confirmed the report later that day. The camp hastily moved forward, believing they should receive assistance from Latter-day Saints in Clay County, Missouri, but several incidents hindered their progress. A wagon broke down, had to be repaired before the camp could proceed. The wheels ran off at least 2 others. None of the delays was particularly significant in itself, but they hampered progress significantly. And you can just imagine being there. We got this mob threatening us. We got to get going. And then they're hampered, and they're forced to stop on an elevated piece of land between the forks of the Big and Little fishing rivers. While the main group pitched their tents, 5 members of the mob rowed across the river and threatened the saints that they would see hell before morning. Shortly thereafter, it began raining. It rained in torrents throughout the night. The thunder and lightning exceeded all description. Heber C. Kimball related, there was a continuing lightning throughout all night, bright enough to pick up a pin. Another account suggests that small hail fell in the camp. Many others indicate that hail the size of eggs fell only outside the camp. Many of the brethren took refuge in a local church house, but others remained in their tents. Their enemies hid under wagons. One of the mob was reported killed by lightning. Another's hand was torn off by a fractious horse, frightened in the storm. Tree limbs as large as 4 inches in diameter were torn from trees. The storm disorganized the Missourians, which curtailed their achieving the destructive objectives. They left, having failed in their attempt to destroy Zion's camp. Many of the camp members perceived the terrible storm to be providential intervention. Nathan B. Baldwin recorded, quote, the Lord had previously said he would fight the battles of his saints, and it seemed as though the mandate of heaven had gone forth from his presence to apply the artillery of heaven in defense of his servants. Some small hail fell in the camp, but from half a mile to 1 mile around, we were told by inhabitants that the hailstones were as big as tumblers, and the appearance of their destructiveness showed that size was not overestimated. Limbs of trees were broken off, fence rails were marred and splintered, and the growing corn was cut down into shreds. But the casualties were on the side of our enemies. Elder George A. Smith further declared, I have ever felt thankful to my Heavenly Father that He, by this storm and sudden rise of the streams, prevented our having a bloody conflict with our enemies, who were thereby prevented from attacking us. The stream rose to a depth between 30 and 40 feet. After leaving camp and seeing the destruction caused by the severe hailstorm, the brethren once again prayerfully expressed gratitude for their divine preservation. Now, one of the members of the mob had prophesied that he would either die or taste the blood of Joseph Smith. I'm going to get him. Well, that's kind of a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. His last name was Campbell. Campbell swore as he adjusted his pistols on holsters, the eagles and turkey buzzards shall eat my flesh if I do not fix Joe Smith and his army so that their skins will not hold shucks 2 days before 2 days are past. They went to the ferry and undertook to cross the Missouri River after dusk, and the angel of God saw fit to sink the boat in the middle of the river. And 7 out of 12 that attempted to cross were drowned. Thus suddenly and justly they went to their own place. Campbell was among the missing. He flowed down the river some 4 or 5 miles and lodged upon a pile of driftwood, where the eagles, buzzards, ravens, crows, and other wild animals ate his flesh from his bones, to fulfill his own words, and left him a horrible example of God's vengeance. He was discovered about 3 weeks after by one Mr. Purtle. Owens saved his life only. He's another mob member. After floating 4 miles down the stream, where he lodged upon an island, swam off naked about daylight, borrowed a mantle to hide his shame, and slipped home, rather shy of the vengeance of God. Elder Neal A. Maxwell gave a great summary of what these individuals learned. Those who marched in Zion's camp were not exploring the Missouri countryside, but their own possibilities. He added, episodes such as Zion's camp, however, do nothing to do with real estate, but everything to do with our second estate. George A. Smith noted Even a dog could not bark at some men without murmuring at Joseph. Joseph had to bear with us and tutor us like children. There were many, however, in the camp who never murmured and were always ready and willing to do as our leaders desired. I know I read part of that earlier, but it just on its own teaches such a great principle. Now, this is another thing I would have up on the wall. Just a list of all the members of Zion's camp, but with colors. You may notice, look at those whose names are red. They become members of the Quorum of the 70. Those in blue, we'll get to those in the next couple screens, are apostles. Those who are green will become bishops, and those yellow serve on the high council. And as you see, you get a lot of the church's membership. A lot of their leadership comes from Zion's camp. And John Murdoch was a little bit of both. Okay, so he gets two colors there. But it's amazing how the Lord prepares these people to become leaders in God's kingdom. When they're done, some of the brethren are upset with Joseph. And maybe I would be too if I've traveled that far and haven't done anything. And he tells these group of future leaders, "Brethren, some of you are angry with me because you did not fight in Missouri. But let me tell you, God did not want you to fight. He could not organize the kingdom with 12 men to open the gospel door to the nations of the earth, and with 70 men under their direction to follow their tracks, unless he took them from a body of men who had offered their lives and who had made as great a sacrifice as did Abraham." I love Elder Lauren C. Dunn's quote about this. I don't know all the reasons the Lord tries us in this life, but there are two or three come to mind. I think he wants to know who he can trust. Many thought Zion's camp was a tragic waste of time until it was later demonstrated that the Lord used the ordeal to find whom he could trust. He wanted to know who had roots of faith and testimony that reached deep into the ground and who had such shallow roots that the first wind would blow them over. Secondly, the Lord tells us in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 122, that adversity came to Joseph Smith to give him experience. There's something about the eternal purpose of life that requires us to meet and experience trial and sorrow as we seek to overcome. For the Lord has also told us, if they should never have the bitter, they could not know the sweet. In other words, and I just love this picture, never give up. By the way, that was given to me as a devotional handout when I was in high school, in seminary. So I've just liked it since then. Ellen Neal and Maxwell, I don't think God is interested in real estate. He owns it all anyway. He does seem to be incredibly interested in what happens to us individually and will place us in those circumstances where we have the most opportune chances to grow and carry out our purposes. The Lord, in section 105, also gives some insights about the redemption of Zion and things that they could have learned or should learn from this, and that we all can learn. 105 verse 3, but behold, they have not learned to be obedient in the things which I require at their hands. So that's maybe one lesson. We need to learn to be obedient. But are full of all manner of evil, and do not impart their substance as becometh saints to the poor and the afflicted among them. And I know I'm kind of reading through this, but you'd be thinking, man, there's another lesson. Learn to share. And are not united. Verse 4, learn to be united. Verse 5, Zion cannot be built up unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom. Otherwise, I cannot receive her myself. And my people must needs be chastened until they learn obedience, if it must needs be, by the things which they suffer. We can choose to be obedient, or God can help us along in helping us to be obedient through nudges or trials or however he deems fit. Okay, verse 10, I'm skipping a little bit, that they themselves may be prepared, and that my people may be taught more perfectly and have experience, and know more perfectly concerning their duty and the things which I require at their hands. And this cannot be brought to pass until my elders are endowed with power from on high. Zion's not going to be redeemed until you have that power, that endowment that comes from the temple. And verse 18, as much as there are those who hearkened unto my words, I have prepared a blessing and an endowment for them, if they continue faithful. I have heard their prayers, and will accept their offerings. And it is expedient in me that they should be brought thus far for a trial of their faith. I love verse 24. Talk not of judgments, neither boast of faith, nor of mighty works, but carefully gathered together, as much in one region as can be, consistently with the feeling of the people. I just love that little phrase, because there's a lot of things that went so right and they're so blessed, but you know what? Don't boast of it. You saw God's hand in your life. Be grateful. Share it. Be consistent with other people's feelings. And, love verse 31, but first let my army become very great. Let it be sanctified. I love that. There has to be purification of the heart and the mind. Be willing to align our will with God's. Let it be sanctified before me, that it may become as fair as the sun, clear as the moon, that her banners may be terrible unto all. Joseph later related the vision he had received of the state and condition of those who died in Zion's camp. Brethren, I have seen those men who died of cholera in our camp, and Lord knows, if I can get a mansion as bright as theirs, I could ask no more. As he related details of the vision, he wept, and at times he could not speak. Now, there's a lot of stories and some scriptures, but how can today's difficulties be like a Zion's camp for us? These trials, what are we learning? And why do we experience trials of our faith? And what are your current trial or trials? Maybe there's more than one. What are they teaching you? I think it was difficult at the time for them to sustain Joseph Smith in that, because they're seeing him as a member of, he's a leader, but what do you know about turtle eggs or snake eggs? Or, hey, what do you mean? Tell us not to kill or torment animals, and you walk up with a gun, borrow my gun, then shoot a squirrel. You're not even doing what you're saying. But the sustaining of a prophet blesses us. How are we doing in sustaining a prophet? Even when it's difficult. Because you got to know, God always vindicates his prophets. Always has, always will. Hey, thanks for spending a little bit of time with me with sections 102 to 105 of the Doctrine and Covenants. I hope you have a great day. Keep smiling. Bye.